Now, in the new year, and I want you to think about this, and we'll talk about it again next week, next year. What you want to do, because, and you've got options. We could continue with the Old Testament story. I was hoping Peg and Van would be here because they've been coming to things, but maybe they're under. And it's not a great day to be out anyway. We could continue with the Old Testament, and we've been in there for a while, and we can move into the books of Samuel, which is a continuation of the story, at least the narrative. We can go to the New Testament, and maybe something like Luke. We haven't talked about Luke here. We did talk about Mark, and we did do John. So we could do Luke, and if we do Luke, we could then do Acts, because Luke and Acts are together. That's really 2 volumes of one work. And I've been doing that at night, but that doesn't affect y'all. So we could do that if you want. We could take a break. We could do something else if you want. So, think about it. This will be finished next week if you want to meet next week, which we don't have to. It's, right, the Christmas week, it doesn't matter to me. I'll be here. So it's what y'all want to do. So just give it some thought, and we'll either decide next week if we meet or in the new year as we get close to a quarter century from Y2K. Yikes.
We made it.
What's that?
We made it.
Man, but it feels like yesterday.
Yeah.
2000 seems like yesterday. Jeez Louise, it was almost 25 years ago. All right.
We really enjoyed the progression through this chronologically, so to speak.
Right.
If that influences. It doesn't matter to us, but we really it seems like the Bible is flowing well through.
And that's a great observation, because I think there's certainly different writers. We're talking about different writers, and like we've mentioned in this little study, when you compare Joshua and Judges, you've got radically different intentions in the two. I mean, one's a glorious story of success and faith and dedication and unity and all this, and then you get to Judges and it's a story of what? Disobedience. And we're going to see today and next week even more so, disunity and confusion and chaos and very flawed people, leading. So you have this difference in tone and even in terms of presentation, because we read Joshua and the land is cleared of foreigners, and this becomes their land, and they establish themselves, and God is with them, and they're all focused on the Lord. This is going to be God's country. And then we immediately enter Judges, and we find out that there are all kinds of people still in the land. That the land isn't clear at all. And in fact, the writer of Judges says that's what God intended. Didn't want the people. He wanted foreigners in the land to be, a testing. So clearly we're talking about different perspectives on it, which means we're talking about people who are shaping, the story, or somebody's shaping the story. And we're going to see the same thing if we decide to go into the books of Samuel, because we're going to see today the introduction of an idea that we haven't heard. And even something like Judges, I think, is compiled by a person. And I've said, I think I've used this term before. People who study the Bible call it redactors. The redactor is the one who brings a bunch of stories together. That person may be writing some of them, or some of it, or shaping some of them, but he's not, or she's not creating the stories. They're there. And the redactor is bringing them together in a narrative. And maybe stories coming from different places. We saw that in Genesis. Some of the stories almost are contradictory in the way, when we looked at Noah, and was it, two of every kind, or, 7 pairs of clean animals on the ark. Well, both of them are there. So which one is true? Well, they're both in the story. So it's coming from different times, from different hands, that the redactor is putting together. And that's what I think we see it throughout the Old Testament, because we're taking oral stories that are being passed on, that are being written down. So you're taking these, and Judges is a great example, that these heroes that people may have been talking about throughout the history of Israel, these different great men who rise to save the people, which we see in all kinds of cultures. What the redactor is doing is taking those stories and putting it in a theological context. So they aren't just great heroes of the past, they all have a common focus. And that's under the inspiration of the Spirit. That's what the redactor is doing, which becomes exciting. But sometimes the stories are coming from different places and they don't necessarily fit neatly together. And we're going to see today in the introduction of an idea. It's not going to be the big theme, but we're going to see it mentioned twice, which means it must be important, in this story, of an idea that we really haven't encountered before that's going to be a big deal in the books of Samuel. Huge deal in Samuel, and really reflects a tension within the book itself. So it's kind of being in. So, Denny, thank you, because I think that's what we see. We see the redactors creating a narrative, creating a history that flows, always from a theological perspective, always. And that's how they're shaping it. So, okay, so we may go into, I know Van likes to do Old Testament, because he's told me about that before. So First Samuel is fine. Probably want to do First Samuel before we do 2nd, because it makes sense. Okay, so we're in Judges. Who are some of the judges we've encountered? Deborah, thank you. Oh man, if you don't win points for that, I don't know what. Shoot, that's good.
ABJ for life for you, pal.
Shaved, wearing the same color. Man, you're cooking today. Okay, so yeah, Deborah was a judge. Who else were some judges we've looked at?
Trying to think of the one that everybody said was wimpy. Why can't I think of his name?
How about Gideon?
Gideon.
I'm having a hard time.
Yeah, well, that's okay. Gideon was a judge. Who did we look at last time?
Was it Samson?
Looked at Samson as a judge, and as we've looked at the stories, and again, we got a guy shaping these stories. What are some of the things we can say about all the judges? What do they have in common? What do these judges have in common? What do they all do? What do all of these judges do, with a little asterisk next to Samson?
Lead the people.
Okay, all the judges are leading the people, right? And why do they need to lead the people? Why are they appointed to lead? What's the situation that they're encountering that would demand or require that they lead?
They don't know what to do on their own.
Okay, what is occurring around them that would cause them to say they don't know what to do? In Judges, there's always this pattern.
People were disobedient.
That's it. The people disobey, always. And the disobedience, again, according to the judges, is always the same thing. What is the common disobedience?
Worship idols.
They worship idols. That's it. They're not bad to the people. They don't disobey all the moral laws that are there. It has nothing to do with that. It always has to do with worshiping idols. Always. The people worship idols. What happens to them when they worship idols? This happens every time.
They're ruled by other people.
Somebody in the land. It's never, we're not talking about people coming in. It's not the Egyptians on invading, the Assyrians on invading, the Hittites on. They're people in the land, which at the very beginning, The writer of Judges says, God said, people are going to be in the land to test them. And the people drift after the gods of the people who live in the land. And God allows those people to conquer them and control them. So you got problems around. Israel does the same thing every single time. They sin, they're oppressed, and then what do?
Cry out to God.
They cry out for God to help, and God does by sending a leader.
Yes.
And the leader sort of galvanizes them, and they defeat the enemy, and the leader leads for a while, and then he dies, and what does Israel do?
Same thing.
Worship other gods, commits idolatry. And so the pattern is repeated over and over again. As you look, though, at the judge, and again, I think that the pattern is just so clear, it would seem to me it was intentional. When you see a pattern, you almost have to assume that it's intentional. I mean, if you say it's just random, doesn't matter, then it's hard to interpret. There seems to be a pattern as you look at the judges themselves. From the beginning to Samson, the one we looked at last time, what do we see happening within the judges? So, in a sense, the judges are always pretty much the same. They lead the people against the enemy, and God frees the people, and the judges rule. What do we see? What pattern might we see in the judges themselves? Is the quality of these judges the same as we go through the judges?
Use their individual talent.
Yeah, they use their talent. It seems like at the beginning, the early judges were almost classic heroes. They do extraordinary things, and they are incredible leaders, and they galvanize the people. And even when you say galvanize, one of the other things you see in Judges is it's always regional. So it's not like they're doing what Joshua did, uniting all the people to take the land. It's usually regional. It's Judah, or it's Gilead, or it's, we'll see, Dan, or Gad. It seems to be, or Ephraim. It seems to be a tribal deal where the judges liberate people or free people in a certain area, not the whole land. It seems like the quality of the judges tend to slide a little bit. Just like the people end up having problems. They don't seem to learn from this mistake they make over and over again. The quality of the judges slide a little bit from these classic heroes at the very beginning that do extraordinary heroic things to the Gideons, and the Abimelechs in the middle that have flaws but still lead the people to great things, to judges that the last few judges we've looked at, they've been a little different in terms of their quality, particularly the judge we looked at last time, Samson. And even though he's called a judge, because he is, how is Samson different? What were some of the things that were different than Samson that would cause him to stand apart from all the other judges?
He did it all himself.
It is all himself. Samson never becomes the leader of the people. He never leads an army against. Okay, that's one difference. What else with Samson? That's different with him than the others. That I think marks a decline even in the quality of the judges. What else about Samson? In terms of his character,
He turned to prostitutes.
Yeah,
less desirable
yeah,
characters of women.
yeah, he was easily manipulated
Yes, by
by women. That was almost a tragic flaw. Women took advantage of him, and that's interesting because it stands in contrast with what else in his personality. So he showed a genuine weakness when it came to women. What else was Samson? Would Samson be a guy that you would like to know and be close to?
Wasn't he kind of arrogant?
He was kind of, I think it's what the Jews would call a jerk. I think that's what they would call him. I think they would call him a jerk. Because he was. He was arrogant. And what were some of the things that he did that were kind of arrogant? That showed a flaw in his character. That
He kind of baited people, didn't he? Like to have that confrontation because he knew he had the strength to conquer them.
Okay.
So instead of walking away or setting an example, he baited them.
Yeah, and it would and almost in an impetuous way, and or kind of a jerky way. Like when he made the bet with his friends about the lion that he killed. Sweet. What about sweet? That fierce and sweet, or some the riddle. And then when the woman his wife got the information from him, he lost the bet because they knew. And how did he pay off the bet?
By stealing.
He stole somebody else's stuff, and gave it. So he didn't give his own. He stole from somebody, and then immediately, not only he didn't just leave his wife, he gave his wife to his friend because he didn't want to be with her anymore, and then wanted to reconcile. He's just a mess. Samson is a mess, and then because he's ticked off with the Philistines, he ties the foxes' tails with the torches and burns their crops. And Samson is not a good person. He's not a good person, and yet he does all this. He becomes an example or a judge to Israel, and I think there's a reason the writer puts Samson in there, because we're seeing a general decline that's going to lead to something really important that Israel's going to have in the future, that's going to be necessitated by this slow decline. So by the time we get to the end of and then he brings the house down on the Philistines, but the Philistines are still in the land. Samson doesn't defeat the Philistines like the other ones have defeated the enemy. They're still they still have power, because Samson's kind of a one-man wrecking crew. What's the situation in Israel at the end of the Samson story? What is the situation by the time we get to the end of chapter 16? What's the situation?
He got revenge by using his strength
Right.
to collapse the pillars, but it also took his life as well.
Absolutely, and revenge, that's a good word, because that's what he goes for. He seems motivated by revenge, not because of the need of the people. His motivation is selfish, it's personal revenge, and so that's the situation. But we don't have this idea of liberation like we had in the other stories. Okay, we're at 17 now, and we're almost moving past the judges. But I want you to still be aware that I think the writer is pointing us to a continued decline, because Samson is going to be the last judge until we get to Samuel, and Samuel's going to kind of fill that role in the later books. Okay, so who appears at the beginning of 17? And 17 and 18 seem to be one story. So who appears at the beginning of 17? Micah. Now, Micah is where? Where is Micah?
Ephraim?
He's in Ephraim. Okay, so he's in the hill country of Ephraim. What does he tell his mother?
He took her silver?
Okay, he took her silver. In other words, he did what?
Stole.
He stole from his mother, right? And how much silver did he steal?
1,100 shekels.
That's a heck of a lot of silver. He stole a lot of money from his mother, right? And since no mother wants to have all her silver stolen, what did she do? I mean, this is far worse than buying the family size, right? Although that's very similar to stealing silver, having a gallon of creamer. What does the mother do?
She said, "The Lord bless you."
Well, it doesn't say that first.
No.
What does she do at first?
She cursed him.
She curses it. So he steals the money, her money. She curses. So what would we expect by her cursing her son? What would we expect? Her son to...
Something bad will happen.
Yeah, something bad's going to happen. I mean, she's cursed him, something bad's going to happen. What is the son then now doing after his mother has cursed?
He returned though.
He returns the silver. Okay, so he returns the silver. The mother's has cursed him, so he's bringing her money back. And how does the mother respond?
She solemnly consecrated her silver to the Lord for her son to make a carved image.
She praises the Lord. Bless the Lord that he's... Now, what's the irony? She's blessing the Lord, but this is really kind of ironic. Why is this ironic that she's, talking about how her son should be blessed by the Lord? What did her son do? He stole. All he did was return what he had stolen, and she wants the Lord to bless him. Which is a little ironic, right? It's not like he's made it and given it to her. He's just returning a violation of the law, right? And so she's going to take this money that he's returned, not all of it. In fact, when you think about it, not very much of it. She's going to take this money and he returns it all, right? And she makes a promise, right? What does she say? What's the promise she makes? As soon as the money is back, I am going to use that money
to make an idol.
Well, even before she says make an idol, because you're right, she says she's going to do what with it?
I will give it back to you.
I'm going to consecrate it to the Lord. I've got this money back, and you get the sense that she's got this money. This is found money that she assumed was gone. I'm going to take this money and I am going to consecrate it to the Lord. Therefore, we assume that she's going to use it for a godly purpose, right? She's giving it to the Lord because she's gotten this money back. Of course, again, this is kind of ironic because the money is stolen. It's not like this is a godsend. Her son stole it, but she's going to consecrate it to the Lord. How is she going to consecrate it to the Lord? What is she going to do to consecrate it to the Lord? Now, we would assume it's going to be put to some godly use, right? How is she going to consecrate it to the Lord? She is going to...
Have an idol.
She is going to make an idol.
Here we go.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Here we go. Israel in decline. The people of Israel they're in decline. And to make it worse, how much of the money, because she's gotten it all back, she's consecrating you to the Lord by making an idol. And you go, what? She's what? Making an idol to the Lord. And then she's going to consecrate this money returned. How much does she actually use?
Only 200.
200 pieces. She had 1,100 and she uses 200. So not only is it being consecrated to build an idol, it's being only a tiny fraction is actually being used. Now, what happens? So she builds this idol, and it's like the writer wants to make sure we know that how do you want to put it? This idol was made on the cheap because it wasn't solid silver, it was plate, right? It wasn't because she only used 200 pieces, so it was with sheets, silver sheets, that they make the idol. Okay, what happens so we don't get a good impression of the mother. We certainly don't have a good impression of the son, right? Because the only reason he brought it back was because he wasn't moved by the Lord to bring it back. He brought it back because she cursed him, right? So we don't have a good impression of the mother because the mother is out there and kind of cheating God and doing something awful, just exactly what God doesn't want him to do. What happens to the idol? Of course, what would any boy do when his mother makes an idol?
Was it in his home to make a shrine?
He builds a shrine to this idol. Okay? And what is in the shrine? There's two things that are in this shrine. One of which we've seen before, heard about before. Something called an ephod. An ephod. And an ephod is like the apron a priest wears. Remember Gideon? That's what Gideon did. He made an ephod. And the people started doing what with it? Worshipping it. So that became a place of worship. And so he makes this ephod that priests wear. He also makes teraphim. And teraphim, that's a Hebrew word, always plural. That means small gods. They're like household gods. So little idols. So he makes an ephod that a priest would wear, because if he's got a shrine with this big silver-plated idol, right? You got to have a priest, right? And a priest has got to dress like a priest, so he makes the apron. But he also makes these little household gods. We've run into teraphim before. That was in the story of Rachel. Remember the story of Rachel when her dad Lot is trying to, and she's gone off to marry Jacob, and her father chases him, and not Lot. Who? Gosh, I can't. Jacob cheated. Who is it that Jacob cheated? Brain freeze. Her father chases him down and wants his household gods back that she's stolen. And she has them in the saddle. She's got them on her saddle. These are teraphim. That's the word for it. Okay. So, anyway, that's what they do. Now, is this the will of God? Is this something godly that they're creating here? No, of course not. And to make it worse, what does Micah do? What's his initial thing he does? After he builds the shrine, he makes the ephods, that makes the little teraphim, little household gods. What else?
Install one of his sons as a priest.
He installs one of his sons, and we know the story. Who's the only one that can be a priest? Levite. You got to be a Levite to be a priest. So he is violating a whole bunch of things by setting up this pagan shrine where they're going to worship idols. Now, what's our impression of Micah in this story? Shyster, thief, certainly not godly. He can talk about the will of God all he wants, but he's not a godly person, right? Because he is creating, almost like he's creating religion.
Is there a chance that Delilah was his mother?
I guess.
The reason I say that, if you go back just one chapter, they offered her 11,000 shekels to betray Samson. Just only one chapter ago, we talked about 11,000.
It certainly could be. I don't know that I've ever thought about it, but certainly it could be. I think there would be a good possibility, because you assume that the writer knew what he was doing, and by using the same number, he wants to make that connection that you picked out. What might speak against it is we're talking about a different region, because Delilah would have been to the south and west, right near the coast. because that's where the Philistines were. And Samson was active in Judah. This would have been further north. But then I think the fact that the number is the same would causes me to say, that would be something interesting to look at. That's a real possibility that I hadn't considered. So.
You seem like the same quality of people.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And that's sort of what you want to look at when you're reading scripture. What are those little clues? Because we're talking about a writer that's shaping it. So if you've got 1100, there must be a reason. What is the connection between those two? Now it might not be any, but there's a good chance that there is, because he didn't have to give the amount. He really wasn't required, and the fact that they're the same would make it interesting. Would make it interesting to me. So it would be something to look at. And you're right, the quality is there. The quality of the person is there. Okay, so Micah's got his little idol, right? Mm-hmm. Now, what explanation? Now this becomes interesting. What is the explanation the writer gives for what Micah has done? What's the explanation? And he's never done this before. The writer, the redactor, the one who's putting this story together, this narrative together, has never done this. It's the first time he mentions it.
In those days, Israel had no king. One did as saw fit.
There is no king. And because there's no king, people are doing what?
Whatever they want.
Whatever they want. People are doing whatever they want. Which tells us, how does the writer here view a king? What is his view of kingship?
A ruler?
Okay, is it does he have a negative view of kings?
Doesn't seem to.
Doesn't seem to. Good. Because I don't think he does either. I don't think he has a negative view of kings. Now remember, earlier in the story, when they wanted to make Gideon a king, Gideon said no. And then Abimelech said, yes, I'll be a king. But neither one were presented in a positive, that wasn't presented in a positive light. This would appear as though the king is viewed in a positive way. Now I mention that because that's going to be a big deal in the book that follows. Should Israel have a king or not? Should Israel have a king or not? And that's going to be a real tension in the story. And a tension within the people itself. Because some are going to say, and even theologically, some are going to say the king is from God. God has appointed the king. Therefore, the king represents God on earth. Others are going to say Israel doesn't need a king because God should be the king. You don't need king. You may need a judge to be temporary, to rule you temporary, but you don't need a dynastic king because God is your king. You should be listening to God. You don't need a ruler. But here the writer seems to be indicating that they do need a ruler because people are just running amok, like Micah, who builds a shrine, starts his own religion. Okay, who appears in verse 7? A young Levite. From Bethlehem, unimportant, although I think the writer drops that in because Bethlehem's going to be important later. How is Bethlehem going to be important later? If he's in Judah, he's not from the tribe of Judah, but he's in Judah, Bethlehem. How is that going to become important later? Who's going to be from Bethlehem?
Birthplace of Christ.
Birthplace of Christ. Why is it the birthplace of Christ? Because it was also the birthplace of somebody else. Who's going to come from Bethlehem?
David.
That's it. Bethlehem's going to be important in the story later. And we've already seen how the writers will drop in, references, names that doesn't develop now, but will become important later. And we've seen that over and over and over again in the story. And I think he's just dropping this in, because later in the story it's going to be important. It's really not important now. So we've got a Levite that's talks about a young man of Bethlehem in Judah, and he's a Levite. Now, what is a Levite? What makes Levites special?
Priest.
Okay, they can be priests. Not all Levites were, because it's a tribe of Aaron. I mean, it's the descendants of Aaron that become the priests, and Aaron is a Levite, so is Moses. So if you're not a priest, you're still someone who serves God, right? That's the people set aside to serve God in a special way. Now, so we got a young man, a Levite, living in the land of Judah, right? What does he do? What does he have to do? What's his problem in Bethlehem?
He needs a place to
He needs a place to stay. Now, why does this Levite in Bethlehem need a place to stay? As soon as you see Levite and Bethlehem in Judah, why does he have a problem? Why does this Levite have a problem?
He's got no land.
He's got no land. Who has no land?
Levites.
Levites have no land. So as a Levite, there's no tribal land of Levi. The Levites were servants of God. Therefore, they had, territory that they could farm. But they don't have any land that belongs to them as a tribe. So this Levite is just sort of itinerant. He's just wandering the countryside, right? And he has no place to go, right? Where does he end up?
with Micah.
He ends up in Micah. Micah doesn't live in Judah, right? Where does Micah live?
Ephraim.
In Ephraim. So he ends up in the hill country with Micah. But he's a Levite, right? So, and his job as a Levite is to serve God. Do ceremonial things, maybe do priestly things. What happens between this Levite and Micah? And he's not even named. But what happens between this Levite and Micah?
Mike invites him to live with him and be my father and priest. And he's going to give him 10 shekels of silver a year and his clothes and food.
So what is Micah offering this young Levite? What's he offering this young Levite?
A place to stay.
A place to stay and a job. He's giving him a job, right? But it's kind of a. How would you describe this job? And how does the Levite respond?
He agreed.
He agrees to it. Now, what are some issues with this job? So Micah offers this Levite a job at his shrine, right? And the Levite is going to be what? He's going to be a priest, right? At this shrine, something that Levites could conceivably do. So I guess his son is now out of work. Micah's son has now he's been laid off. So he's going to be, Levites can be priests, but what's the problem with this? I mean, this whole situation.
Because it won't be godly.
It's not going to be God's place because he's going to be a priest where? At Micah's little shrine where they do what? Worship this, sheet metal or sheet silver idol, and he will wear the ephod because that's what priests wear. And he's going to lead the worship of this idol that Micah has set up with money he stole from his mother. Oh, the story gets...
There was an ulterior motive when he offered him that job because he thought that would find favor.
Which makes it even worse because Micah's assumption is, since I have hired a Levite and laid off my good-for-nothing son,
This will find favor with God.
The Lord. Now, we got all kinds of problems with this, right? Up and down. Micah's problems with Micah, problems with the Levite, because the Levite's supposed to know. I mean, that's their job, to serve the Lord. And what is he doing? And it's the writer wants to make sure he's doing it for what reason? Why is the Levite working for Micah?
Money.
What's that?
A place to stay.
You a place to stay
And a job.
and a salary. You know, so he's doing it. It's not even, he can't even say, or we the reader can't even look at it and say, well, maybe his motives were good. You know, maybe he thought he could move and change Micah to worship the Lord. No! He's going to lead the worship of this idol because he's being paid to do it. Jeez. You can't look good on somebody paid to lead people in worship. Well, let me rephrase that. What kind of person would accept a salary for leading people in worship?
Someone that likes drinking.
The one who has a daughter who buys family size. Okay. So anyway, this Levite is here working. Chapter 17 just sets us up for 18. Again, what does the writer tell us right at the beginning of chapter 18? Israel has no king, which means Israel is running amok. It's running amok. Maybe a king would straighten things out. We'll have to see. We don't know yet. Now, who is introduced after we hear that Israel doesn't have a king?
The tribe of Danites?
Now we have the Danites, and they're from the tribe of Dan. You know, they're from the tribe of Dan. One of Jacob's sons is named Dan, so they have a share of the land. Now, what's the problem with these Danites, these people from the tribe of Dan?
They were looking for a place to settle.
They're looking for a place to settle. Now, that's kind of surprising because at the end of Joshua, the tribe of Dan got land. They got a share of the land. So why are they looking for land to settle?
They hadn't got an inheritance yet?
Yeah, well, when you look earlier in the first chapter of Judges, it talks about, in fact, in Judges 1, beginning in 34, it talks about the people of Dan being pushed out of their land by the Amorites. So the Amorites, again, people in the land, push the Danites out of their land. So they lose their inheritance, their share of the land. So we've got these Danites who are just doing what? Wandering around. Now, understand, we're talking about a different world anyway. So you had people wandering all over the place because herders, that's what herders did. So it's, we're talking less about established borders and more about a lot of movement. And these are people these Danites are on the move. They're moving, but they want to settle down. Why would anybody want to settle down? Why would you want to settle down? What can you do when you settle down?
Farm.
You can farm. As long as you're moving around, you can't farm. Or it's hard to farm. But when you settle down, you can farm. So these Danites are kind of moving around. Some clans, not the whole tribe, because they're only going to put together an army of 600. And earlier on there was 60,000 Danites. And so we're talking about a small clan, wandering around. So they don't have any territory. What do the Danites decide that they're gonna do?
They sent 5 warriors to spy on the land and explore it.
Okay, because what does that go? What do they want?
They want to claim land.
They want to claim land. They want land to live in, and so they're going to send some spies to check out the land. Now, what are the spies? What will be the goal of the spies? What do they want the spies to tell them?
If they'll be successful.
Yeah, if they're going to be successful, you want to know the odds of winning. So the spies are going to do. Now, this sounds remarkably like another story. What story have we already seen where spies are sent out to sort of case the land. In fact, we've seen 2 stories about spies doing this. Remember? Early on, when the people of Israel crossed the Jordan, or even before they crossed the Jordan, Joshua sent out spies to Jericho to check out Jericho, right? Moses also sent out spies to check out the land, and Joshua and Caleb were the only ones that said, yes, we can do it. So this kind of is reminiscent of these stories that we saw in Numbers and the story we saw in Joshua. This is a little different, though, because these Danites are sending spies into what land? They're not sending spies into Canaan, right? And they're not sending spies to case out the foreign territory around Jericho. Where are they sending the spies?
Ephraim?
To Ephraim. And Ephraim is,
Country.
yeah, and it's one of the tribes of Israel, right? So they're checking out land that belongs to another tribe. Whoa. So one tribe is looking for land that belongs to somebody, to another tribe, to a brother tribe. Okay, so they send out spies, right? And when the spies get to the hill country of Ephraim, what do?
They came to the house of Micah.
Okay, they come to Micah's house, and they spend the night. And who do they meet at the house?
The young Levite.
They meet the young Levite. And about what do they talk?
They want to know why he's here, who brought him there.
Okay. And what does he say to them?
He told them he was hired by Micah.
And it's very clear, right? He's been hired. He's a priest for hire. He's been hired for Micah. And what do they ask him to do?
Inquire of God to learn whether their journey will be successful.
Now, they're asking this Levite, right, who's working for Micah, what's wrong with the request? What's wrong with them asking him, is God going to make our mission successful?
Because he's loyal and hired by Micah, who is not in favor with God.
He is not, and the priest, this Levite, he's not worshiping the God of Israel. He's worshiping this God made of sheets of silver, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so he's worshiping, and what does the Levite say?
Told him it has been approved. The Lord has approved.
Well, you're under the eye of the Lord. So you go, because God is watching your mission. Not exactly a ringing endorsement, but God is there. Which, does he have any right to say? Heck no, because he's leading the worship of an idol. Gosh, this is screwed up, as the Danites. Okay, so what did the spies do? They left. And where do they go? Laish. And when they get to Laish, what do they observe? Now, this is in the land of Ephraim, right? So they're not going anywhere else. What do they observe when they get to this little town or this little area called Laish?
They were living in safety.
Okay, you got a bunch of people living in safety. Now, what kind of people are they?
Shepherds?
Well, they certainly could be. What kind of people? Are they Jews?
Sidonians?
They're Sidonians, which means they're people of Sidon, which is another country. That's why he says they follow the way of Sidon. So they are foreigners living in the land of Ephraim, right? But how does the writer, so they're foreigners, how does the writer describe them?
Unsuspecting and secure.
Unsuspecting and secure. Do we have a positive impression of the people from Laish? I mean, they're foreigners. Every time we run into foreigners are doing nasty stuff, right? They're oppressing the people. Are the people in Laish oppressing, even though they're from Sidon? They're Sidon. Are they oppressing the Jews? No indication. In fact, it would appear as though they are prosperous and peaceful, right? Prosperous and people. How do the spies interpret their situation? They're peaceful, they're prosperous, they're not aggressive at all. How do the spies interpret this situation? We see them as prosperous and peaceful, secure. The spies interpret their situation as
They could overtake them.
weak. They're weak. And why are they weak? Because they're secure. They're living in security. They feel secure where they are. Now,
They also said here that they have no relationship with anyone else, so
Okay.
it would be
a
their
little
own-
community. And in particular, they don't have relationships with Sidon, right? So they don't have relationships sort of with their kinsfolk, so this isn't an invasion again, or a foreign people like the Philistines or the Moabites or the Amorites oppressing the people. This is just a peaceful little community, right? That doesn't have connections with, they just live in peace and security and prosperity. What do the Danites do? When the spies come back and say, man, we have found a place.
They get armed for battle.
They get armed for battle. They're gonna get 600, right? From these clans, these parts of Dan. And what do these 600 people do? What do these 600 armed Danites then do?
Went to Micah's house.
Okay, they invade, right? They go into, and we're talking about 600. So we're not talking about thousands. We're talking about 600 Danites go into the hill country. They, of course, come to the house of Micah, right? And when they get to the house of Micah, what do? And this is great. What do they end up doing at the house of Micah? They took his ephod. They take his stuff. So this stuff that Micah had stolen, they steal, right? They steal. Now, who is there as they are taking Micah's stuff? Who shows up?
The priest.
The priest is there, right?
To know what he's doing.
And certainly the priest, as a man of God, my goodness gracious, sees what they're doing. How does the priest react? What ends up happening between these 600 men and the priest? This Levite priest.
Well, the 600 asked him to come with them and be their priest.
Okay, when he sees it, what are you guys doing? And they say, shut up. We're taking his stuff. But you know something? We could use a guy like you, right? We could use our own priest. And since we have an ephod, and since we have this idol made of sheet metal, right? How'd you like to come with us? What does the priest, so they offer this priest a job. And what does the priest do?
He was glad and went along with it.
He goes along and he collects the ephod, and he collects the teraphim, the little tiny idols, and they pack up the great big one, and boom, he hits the road with the Danites. Impression of this young Levite?
Not good.
Not good. But he's moving up in the world, right? Because he went from just serving Micah
Right.
to now he's serving,
A tribe.
a tribe. So, yeah, which shows that integrity and honesty and godliness succeed, right?
Okay.
Okay, not going to be a sermon on that, not based on this. What happens after they leave? Now, as you described, we're talking about a movement. We're not just talking about an army going, right? Because we've got this group moving with women and children and livestock. This is a migration, right? And of course, because these are fine, upstanding, brave Danites, where do they put the women and children? Exactly where they should be. Where?
In front of them.
What's that?
In front of them.
Right up front.
That's where they want them.
Yeah, because they want to see the scenery first. Who also did this? We saw somebody else do this in the past. Same deal. Put the women and children first. When Jacob went to meet Esau, and Jacob thought Esau was coming to kill him, and he'd already tried to buy him off, and Esau turned back the gifts, and Jacob is there, and assumes Esau is going to kill him. As his final strategy, he puts his wife and children between he and his brother, so that if his brother attacks, they'd have to hack their way through women and children to get to him. What a guy. What a guy. This is what the Danites are doing. They're doing the same thing.
Sounds similar to 2 weeks ago. It sounds similar to 2 weeks ago in Gaza.
Well, how so?
When the women and children were using them as shields. And
Oh yeah, oh absolutely, yes, absolutely. That's right. This is what they're doing. That's what the Danites are doing. They're using them as shields to discourage attacks. Keep the soldiers safe. Let those who are expendable, bear the initial brunt, right? Now, when they leave, so they got the women, and we're talking about a migration, right? Who meets them? Who meets them before they get to Lesh? Because they're going to Lesh, right? Who meets them before they get there?
Micah.
Micah meets them. And what is Micah's deal when he meets them?
He confronts them that they took his stuff.
He took his stuff and his priest. They took his stuff.
What's the matter with you?
And how did the Danites, what is their response?
Don't argue with us. We're some hot-tempered men who will attack you and your family. You and your family will lose your lives.
It sounds like something you'd see in a movie about the mob. You better stay quiet, because be a shame if something happened to you and your family just by accident. Okay?
It would be by accident, Denny, don't worry.
Yeah, and what happens at the end of this little encounter?
So they went their way
And Micah goes home
because they were too strong for him, so he went back home.
without his stuff or his priest. Yes. Now they're going to this peaceful town of Laish that has no connection with a major foreign nation. They're just on their own, but they're prosperous and secure. And what do the Danites do when they get to Laish?
They attack them.
Of course they attack them, And just in case we have forgotten about Laish, how does the writer describe this attack on Laish? When the Danites attack these people?
They burned down their city.
Burn down their city. The people are quiet and unsuspecting. And the Danites attack them, burn down their city. And for these poor people in Laish, there is no one to help. No one to help. Because they are too far from Sidon, which is a city on the Mediterranean, and Aram, which is again, kind of a country with quotation marks, further north. They have no contact there. So they are left on their own, and the Danites burn down the city. Now, where does, as the reader, and this is kind of, I think, kind of cool, because the writer is putting a Jewish writer is writing this. As a reader, where does our sympathy lie?
With those people.
With those people.
Because they were unsuspecting, they were living their own lives without a problem.
Without a problem, prosperous. He couldn't have described it in more glowing term. But they're peaceful. They don't want trouble with anybody. They're not fighting the Jews. They're not oppressing the people of Ephraim. They just got their own little community, and the Danites want. And the Danites,
They rebuilt the city and settled there.
yeah, they take it. They take these poor people. Now, really interesting that the writer is writing, this is a foreign people. Who then is really the enemy? Who comes off looking less than sympathetic? If the people of Lesh are the ones that get our sympathy, oh, what a shame. Who comes off being less than sympathetic?
The Danites?
The Danites don't come off looking good. Micah hasn't come off looking good. The Levite hasn't come off looking good. And what do the Danites, the Levite, and Micah all have in common?
Shysterville.
Well, Shysterville, but what else do they have in common? That may be even more troubling as a reader of this story. What else do they all have in common?
They stole.
Absolutely, they stole. All of them are thieves or horribly corrupt. The Levite, he'll work for whoever pays him the most. He's a terrible person.
But they worshipped false idols.
They worship false idols. Absolutely. They are all children of Israel. They are all children of Israel. The ones that come off sympathetic are foreigners in the land. It's the descendants of the Danites and Micah and the Levite that come off looking bad. Which I think the writer is trying to show what's happening to the people of Israel. What is his point for us, the reader? What does he want us to take away from this?
That they're not good people.
That they're not good people. Not only are they worshiping idols, they are just plain not good people. The children of Israel have become bad. They just aren't good. And what do the Danites do when they take this city? Because they burn it down. What do? You said they rebuilt it.
And they named it Dan after their forefather.
And they name it Dan
who was
after.
born to Israel.
Right. Of course, it's not in the land of Dan, but it's land that they conquered, right?
Right.
Okay. And what do they set up in this city?
The idols.
They set up the idol for themselves, the idol that they stole. And the Levite that they hired to work for them, he is replaced, right? And who becomes the priest in this idolatrous temple?
Jonathan, son of Gershom, the son of Moses.
Okay, a descendant of Moses. So they, again, Micah sets his son up as priest, and his son gets fired because of a Levite. Levite is hired, and now this Levite, he gets fired and replaced by somebody even better, a descendant of Moses. That's even better, right? And in fact, the writer reminds us that what do they continue to do?
Worship the idol.
That
Micah made.
They worship the idol that Micah made. And again, the writer wants to make sure we know that they are worshiping the same idol that Micah made. And it says the house of the Lord was at Shiloh. What are they talking about, the house of the Lord? We haven't heard it mentioned in a long time. What is meant by the house of the Lord is at Shiloh?
They're meaning at peace?
Well, it's the tent. Remember the tent that they traveled around with that had the ark in it? That's where the tent is. The tent's in Shiloh. So that's kind of where Jewish worship is supposed to be centered, around the tent and the ark. The tent of meeting, where God's presence is. But the Danites have built a rival temple in Dan. And you can still see it. It's still around. Now, what is the situation in Israel in the book of Judges? Because we don't have a judge. There's no judge mentioned in this story. What's the situation?
Deterioration.
It is really deteriorating. And he gives a sort of an anecdotal story of how the situation has deteriorated. So it's not, he doesn't say everywhere, In this example, we're seeing how far Israel has fallen, right? Not only are they still worshiping idols, and the priesthood has become really corrupt. I mean, that they worship anybody that'll pay them to worship. But they're now attacking peaceful people. Even though they're foreigners, they're attacking peaceful people. What would be the only thing worse? What would be, so they're really declining to a low point. What would be the only thing worse than what they've done? And we haven't seen it yet. We haven't seen this yet in the book of Judges. What would be, you think you're going to the bottom of the barrel, but there's a little room before you get right to the bottom. What would be the only thing that they haven't done to this point? Well, we're going to see it next week. They're going to find a little bit more room near the bottom of the barrel. So they're going to decline even more. So, because there's one thing they haven't done yet, but they'll do it next week. They worship other gods. They become the oppressors. They become a peaceful people. They attack peaceful people, that are not trying to take their land. They're just living there in security. That they do. They'll get worse next week. Next week will be the absolute bottom of the barrel. And we'll look at it after Christmas. Any questions about this story? Now remember, a Jew is writing this for Jewish people living later. He's telling them. I think that's remarkable. This isn't a story that talks about a glorious past. No Jew who reads this is going to say, "Ooh, man, my ancestors were really good. We want to be like them." This is not good. This is not good. Okay, let's have a word of prayer. Lord God, thank you so much for leading us through this. Remind us that human beings, even human beings that are called by God, well, we're vulnerable. And we can decline, and we can chase after other gods, and we can become corrupt and do things that are not according to your will. So remind us of that, and maybe by reminding us of that, you'll help us avoid doing these things. We ask this in the name of Christ. Amen. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.